Morning, everyone. So I am so upset because I spent all that time recording this entire presentation and there was no sound. So I'm starting over again. And I said so much amazing stuff, but guess what? God got me. So we're gonna go through this again, and hopefully all the amazing stuff I said comes back and the flow works very well. But I was gonna upload it with just the plain PowerPoint, but I still want to give you guys some, little videos and talk through it. So here we go again. Grab your tea, grab your coffee. I know I need mine because this is about to be long. But here we go, guys. Chapter 2, the self in a social world. So today's lesson is definitely asynchronous, but you have some individual and group activities to complete today in class because it's class until 1 p.m. So here we go. Take 2. So here's our little memo. I won't take up time going through this like I did the first time, but stay positive. And this is definitely who knew that at the beginning, I was the one that needed to stay positive to make this happen and negative stuff happening. But here we go. So today's focus, we're going to be focusing on some key concepts that came out of chapter 2, our sense of self. So our self concept, are you independent or interdependent? So your self-concept connects to either one of these two, right? By now you have a better understanding from the chapter what self-concept means, self-schemas and how they relate to your self-concept and how you view other people, and how social comparisons also has an interplay as well. So the first thing that we're going to do is you're going to answer the question, I am. And to do this, you're going to complete an activity. The activity is posted on our course page. So you are going to head on over to the Google Classroom page and you'll see on the stream at the very top, there's a spot for you to complete this mini activity. So stop right now and you're going to head on over there. You're going to write 5 things to complete this statement. I am, and you're going to write 5 things. And you're going to number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So head on over to the Google Classroom and do that now. All right, so by now you would have already created your post and answered the question, who am I? Right? So you would have listed 5 things to answer this question. And your answer to this question, it's important because it helps determine your self-concept. So essentially what you would have learned from the chapter is self-concept, the answer to the question I am tells us about your self-concept, right? So your self-concept is just your overall knowledge of yourself, how you view yourself, right? And so this task gives you some insight to how you perceive yourself, how you view yourself at this very moment, your present self, right? What you regard to be most important about who you are may have been listed at number 1. So, and this is what social psychologists are telling us, right? The thing that comes to our mind right away when someone may ask us to talk about ourselves, or when you answer this question, I am, that is the thing that is probably a central part of who you are and probably ranks high up, right? In the way you perceive yourself. So, yeah, take a look at that, ponder about that. Does it? Do you think that one that you listed as number 1, do you think that really is something that you feel is very important about you? Tell me. Tell me in the comments under the post, right? Go back and let us know. So these beliefs about ourselves can be identified as our self-schemas. Our own self-schemas can affect how we perceive or view other people. So in the book, you would have learned about self-schemas, and schemas are just our mental templates by how we kind of organize things in our environments of the world we live. So our self schemas, for example, Let's say you perceive yourself as a great cook, right? So the fact that you perceive yourself as a great cook, it kind of determines how you're going to evaluate others people and other people cooking, right? So because you may have you may have this self schema that you're a great cook, and this maybe ranks high in your self concept. It means that it's centrally connected to you, and so when you taste other people's food or you look at food or whatever, that's gonna be one of the first things that kind of stands out to you, right? Or if you're an athlete or you're into fitness, right? This is essential to yourself. So if being an athlete is a part of your self schema, then you're going to start to look at people based on that, right? So right away, their fitness level or how they kind of interact athletically, that's going to stand out right away to you. You're going to notice their bodies, you're going to notice their skills immediately, right? So have you ever been in a situation where you would have looked at someone and pointed it out, and other people were like, whoa, I didn't realize that, um wow, how you noticed that? Oh yeah, for real. So the fact that you're able to probably notice some things that other people may not notice right away may be connected to your self schema, right? And it can affect, so you can see how our self schemas can affect how we evaluate ourselves and how we evaluate other people. And we see these coming out in shows like The Ultimatum, that's a new show on Netflix, and Wife Swap, right? This can bring this out. And just really quickly, I went through this the first time, but I'm not going to spend too much time, but very quickly in Wife Swap, normally they use two moms, and they take them into homes that are a little bit opposite from what they're used to. And you would see that immediately when the mom steps in, if the mom self schema is related to cleanliness, or she perceives herself to be very clean. When she steps into the home, the first thing she noticed could be a speck of dust on the edge of the table, and she starts evaluating that, how these people are not very clean and all of this stuff. And you as a viewer are looking like, what are you talking about? That looks good, or something of that sort. But that tends to happen. And so that can bring, so in those situations, in those reality shows, it can really bring out people's self schema and how they link this in evaluating other people. So factors that influence your self-concept can be biological and environmental. So let's have a look at what I listed as my I am, right? So my list, I had always helpful, God-fearing, creative, loving, and sincere. And I feel like I'm repeating myself because, yeah, I recorded some awesome content, but I'm not gonna let it get to me, right? So I'm going to tap into just some key takeaways that I previously spoke about. So creative. So on here I have creative. And this area of my self-concept was a part of my past self and also my present self. It never changed. And one of the reasons why this is a part of my self-concept is a bit biological and environmental. Biological because I know that I was born with an innate ability to be creative, to draw, to be able to draw what I see very well, paint what I see very well, and all of that, right? But this became a part. Some people may be good at things biologically, but they may not represent it as a part of their um influence. I mean, sorry, as a part of their self-concept, right? But this came out as a part of my self-concept because of environmental influences through relationships. So my mom and my teachers and my friends, my classmates around me from very young, from primary school age, they noticed that I was very good at art. I was very good at just taking odds and ends from around the room and creating something beautiful from it, right? Or something very innovative from it, or putting ideas together in a real creative way. And so they would always speak that into my life, and I started processing it. And so that became a part of me. Now that was a positive influence. The relationships in my environment was a positive influence on developing my self-concept as being creative. But when we look at Cinderella, right, at home with her stepsisters and her stepmom, right, tapping in on that story from last week, Cinderella may have had a negative self-concept about herself because they didn't speak life into her, right? They would have spoke a lot of negative things, and so that would have caused something in her self-concept to be negative because of that influence in her environment, right? And then on the flip side, though, your self-concept can also change, right? So I'm sure that if I had wrote a list in primary school, my list would probably look a lot different from today. But I know for sure creativity or being creative, I am creative, would have remained constant because I can remember, if there's anything I can remember about how I viewed myself as a child, is that I viewed myself as being creative. So that part of my self-concept remained consistent, while other parts have changed, right? And so we can have interests that influence our self-concept, which is environmental, attitudes, which is environmental, aptitudes that are biological, personality traits, which are biological, and then our values and beliefs that are environmental. So if you look at my list, you can see that I also have some influence from values and beliefs. And which one do you think is connected to that? You got it. God fearing, right? So have a look at your list again and see if you can identify some of these influences, these biological environmental influences in your current present self-concept list that you just posted. Go and have a look. So our self-concept is the mental image we have of ourselves, how we view ourselves. So if you have a positive self-concept, you're going to feel good about yourself and you're going to focus on the things that you can do very well, which are your strengths, right? And that means normally these people who have very high, who have very good positive self-concept, they often have very high confidence, and you can see them presenting themselves as a confident person. And that is something that we also talked about, the connection between self-concept and how we self-present, right? So we self-present ourselves in two ways. We self-present for our external environment, and we self-present for our internal environment, which is ourself, right? External for others. So if you have a positive self-concept and you know you feel good about yourself and you're very confident, the way this person may self-present, you're gonna see that confidence. You've ever seen someone walk in the room and you can see that they're confident, you can automatically tell that they're confident and they haven't said anything to you, right? It could just be in their, you're noticing their mannerisms, their dress, then you hear them speak and you hear how they speak, and you can just tell that they're very confident because of the way they're self-presenting. And then you may see someone who is self-presenting in a way where you can kind of tell in your spirit, you can tell that they're a bit shy, right? Or they're a bit quiet, or they're a bit reserved, right? And so the way they self-present is connected to some things that they currently have as self-schemas, as their self-concept, right? So if you have a negative self-concept, you're going to feel bad about yourself. I can't do it. I'm not worthy. I need to be perfect, and nothing I'm doing is perfect. I'm not good enough, right? And you're going to focus on these weaknesses, and then you're going to self-present from that area, right? So, for example, let's look at Cinderella. before the fairy godmother and the prince came in, she may have had a negative self-concept because of the environmental influences on her from her relationships with her stepmom and stepsister. And so she how did she self-present? She would still wearing the drab clothing and shy and timid. So you see the point? You see what I'm saying here? So our self-concept ties in to our self-presentation. Have you ever watched like those before and after shows, those makeover shows, and they show you the person and you see how they're presenting themselves because usually it's due to either body images or things of their past and stuff that has them feeling shy or feeling some type of way, so they don't really show their confidence. But then after you can see a slight change, right? So our self-concept, right, or our sense of self is connected to our self-schemas. And as I said before, your self-concept can change over time. So you have a past self, and this past self could be based on previous situations that you've been through, right? So if you are on hard times, or you were in a bad relationship like Cinderella was with her family, or you whatever it may have been, you may have been depressed, whatever, that past self, the way you would have viewed your self concept, right, at the time may be different now to your present self for whatever reason. Your past self simply could just be biological, because we grow from a child to a man and a woman. And so things that you would have identified as important about who you are as a child in primary school and then in high school and now as an adult would have changed because of your developmental process. So your self-concept, you could have had various past self-concepts. But the one right now that you listed when you answered that question, I am, and if you haven't, please go to the Google Classroom page and do it right now. That one is your present self. And guess what? It could possibly change in some way again to create your future self, right? So it would be good to revisit this later to see how you would have changed. For example, you're currently in your pursuit to become a registered nurse, to become a teacher. And so at the end of gaining this degree and what this degree means to you for a variety of reasons, your self-concept may change again based on that influence, that environmental influence, right? So let's look at the right hand side here. So the three components of self-concept. So our self-concept is attached to our self-image. And so when you look at this picture, you see this person look in the mirror, the man in the mirror, right? How you view yourself. So what you see, do you view yourself as beautiful, handsome, smart, intelligent, ugly, fat, too thin and scrawny? You view yourself, you see long hair, thick hair, my hair is too thin, whatever it is, right? When you look in the mirror, whatever you see or how you perceive yourself, that's your self-image, right? For me, I'll give you an example. When I was younger, in my past self, when I looked in that mirror, that proverbial mirror, my self-image, I was very conscious of physical traits, right? Specifically my body. And because I had a negative outlook of myself, a negative self-concept based on my body, I self-presented in a different way connected to that, right? So my self-presentation to people, I always try to not look too flashy, because I didn't want to draw attention to myself, because I didn't like how I looked. I would wear clothes that were loose fitting because I didn't like how I looked. So to me, my self-concept, a part of my self-concept then is that I view myself as unattractive, right? And so I self-presented based on that view of myself of being unattractive. Okay, and when I looked at people, based on that self schema, I evaluated people in a way that was better than me. I could always find things that made them better than me, right? In the image view, in how they looked, right? So your self image as a part of your self concept can affect how you self present, right? Your ideal self, how you view yourself, as being this perfect person. Your ideal self is a part of your self concept and can also help to answer that question, who am I? Because you may have said, I am a future nurse. That could have been something you said because you see your future being a future nurse as a part of your ideal self. And you may self-present based on that as well, right? How you carry yourself, how you speak, conversations, who you interact with and how you interact with them, right? How you present yourself when you're around medical professionals and what have you, right? And then your self-esteem is also connected to your self-concept. And depending on how you view yourself and your self-concept, that can then affect your self-esteem. So if you have a negative self-concept, what do you think how do you think your self-esteem is going to be? Exactly. It's going to be poor. It's going to be negative. And so how do you think you may self-present? It may show in your actions, your body language. Look at this image. This girl is talking, and doesn't she look confident from her body language? And then look at him. So he may have a low self-esteem. He may be nervous. He may be shy. He may be down. He may feel, that he really likes this girl, but he don't think she likes him. And so you look at his body language, very shy, and right? So your self-esteem could affect how you self-present, and it's a part of your self-concept. Okay, guys, so this is an activity zone, right? And so we are going to tap into a group assignment. And so you're going to complete the Cinderella self-concept graphic organizer in groups of 2 or 3. You're going to hop on WhatsApp video or Teams or Zoom with your group members or Google Meet or whatever video conferencing platform that you guys want to use to connect together as a team. You only need one person to be a scribe, so that person will open up the document and type in the answers that you guys as a team discuss about Cinderella's self-concept. You're going to log on to the Google Classroom, head on over to the activities section, open that up to get that form that you're going to fill out. Everyone needs to submit a copy of their group's answers so that I can give you the grade, right? Follow the instructions there. I have all the instructions there for you. Okay, so right before you head off to do that, Brown 2020 tells us that our self-concept develops throughout your lifespan, and it's influenced by many different factors. So you see that all that I was saying is not just from me as your professor, right? This is related to research, right? And like I told you before, your self-concept develops throughout life based on a variety of reasons. Number one, wisdom and just your development, right? As a human being, we develop over time, and there's things that that's biological that affects our development, and then there's also experiences that affect our wisdom and development and growth through life. And so those things can ultimately cause us to make some changes in our self-concept. We see people go through it all the time, right? That change over time, and then that affects them. Your belief system can affect your self-concept as well. So if you convert to some other religion, right? The beliefs from that religion now can affect how your self-concept, how you view yourself, how you answer that question, I am, right? And then ultimately now that will affect how you now self-present to others and the external, and how you self-present to yourself, the internal, right? So everything is always interrelated. So let's look at Cinderella, right? Let's view Cinderella, because Cinderella's self-concept, she's a prime example of how her self-concept changed over her lifespan. Now, we know from the story that Cinderella was very well loved by her dad before he died, right? And so she would have definitely probably had a very positive self-concept at that time in her life. Now, after he died, and she was in the care of her stepmother and in this environment with her stepsisters, that became a very negative environment. That could have influenced her self-concept to change from a positive one and now develop some negative. So it may have not completely changed her, but we can be pretty sure that based on what we see in the story, that Cinderella would have had some negative things added to her self-concept, right? And how she viewed herself because of how those environmental factors through relationships would have influenced her, right? So before she met the prince, before she met her fairy godmother, right? She may very well had some negative self-concept, right? What were they? That's for you to figure out, right? However you guys probably think that through, right? So how do you think she would have described her self-concept before meeting her Prince Charming and her fairy godmother, right? What do you think her self-concept becomes after these new relationships, environmental factors come in and influence her? So her fairy godmother coming in and speaking all these things to her and making her believe these stuff about herself and her beauty, and and the prince now coming in with his love and concern and care. How do you think her self-concept will be after? And what factors do you believe may have influenced her self-concept? So we know definitely relationships. Do you think there are any other factors that may affect Cinderella's self-concept? Any other biological or environmental factors? Discuss that in your groups as you guys work through that assignment. So I'll be looking forward to seeing it. Remember, this group assignment must be submitted by 1 p.m. Why? Because we're in class. Even though it's asynchronous, you have to do it, and you're going to do it during our class time, right? Doesn't matter what time throughout the class, you guys decide as a group if you want to stop now and do it together, or you're going to work it out, all right? But you have it to do. See you guys later. Next slide. So So we're going to come back to how you answered the I am question, right? So we're coming back to that. And this is important because, you know, the way you answer the question, I am, it's related to your self-concept. And this is something that you're going to have to talk about in your upcoming assignment. So I'm spending a lot of time kind of circling back around this because it is an important part of your assignment and what you have to do. So I want to make sure that you understand this, right? So how you completed that statement, I am, it gives you some information about your personality traits, right? For example, I am honest, I am tall, I am smart, I am outgoing, right? If you said or gave responses similar to that, that links to personality traits, right? Maybe some of you describe yourself and answer this question by saying, I am a Taurus, I am a Pisces, I am a Farrington, right? Using your family name, right? Or I am a Muslim, I am a Christian, right? Answers like that, responses like that connect to your social identity and how you view yourself in this world among social groups, right? So go back and look at your list again and see if you can identify information about yourself based on those answers. Are they connected to personality traits? Are some of them connected to that? Or are some of them connected to social identity? Have a look, right? Reflect on that. Because in your assignment, these are things that you can talk about. You can talk about parts of your your self-concept and what it's connected to, right? These are things we want to see. Because why we want to see this and why do we want to reflect on this? Because the way we answer and those answers that we give, it helps us to determine whether or not it's connected to an independent view of self or an interdependent view of self. So our independent view of self, so if we look right here at the right, our independent view of self is looking at ourselves detached from other people, right? So we don't depend on anyone else to validate a particular point about who we are, right? We view ourselves independently from anyone else because we value unique traits that we have, right? Our interdependent view of self. So our interdependent view of self is connected to other people and social groups, right? And how they shape us and who we are, right? Now you'll see here that an independent view of self, if you have an independent view of self, if majority of your 5 responses are linked to an independent view of self, that may be very well, because within this part of the world, North America and the western side of Europe, we're close to North America, of course, because of where we're located, right? And also you're going to see that. So when you look in America, you notice that people really live their authentic selves. They don't really care about what others think about them. If they want to split their tongue because they want it to look like a lizard, they do it. They don't care, right? Because they have strong beliefs about who they are independently from others. And so they'll self-present showing that. And so that's very common in that part of the world. So those influences may trickle down to us as well, right? Where we may have, if you have a lot of independently linked view of self, that's probably why. But you can have a strongly linked interdependent too, because of our culture, our Caribbean culture, which is very similar to Asian, African culture. Obviously, we're influenced by African culture, because when we link where we come from African communities through our ancestors, and then also through some European cultures as well, right? That kind of makes up this melting pot, as well as some American culture, right? That makes up this melting pot of who we are as Bahamians and who we are as Caribbean people. And so you may have a mix of an independent and interdependent self, right? But what studies have shown is that majority of people in North America, Western Europe, a majority of them may have an independent view of self, versus in Asia or Africa, who majority may have an interdependent view of self. And that's related to the cultural makeup as well, as we know. So in your upcoming assignment, once you would have finished talking about your self-concept and what affects that self-concept and what influences it and where it comes from, and you relate all that stuff, you're going to have to then analyze that and determine whether or not your self-concept has an independent view of self or an interdependent view of self, right? You may have a mix and you can talk about that, but then I want you to talk about which one was more dominant. Which one do you think is more dominant than the other, right? If you feel you have a mix, you have to discuss that, and you have to point out aspects in your self-concept that relate to an independent view or relate to an interdependent view, right? So this is an important key takeaway from the textbook, because this also helps you to identify, to better understand who you are, right? It's funny because you would think that you know yourself very well, like extremely well. But a lot of times when we're put in a position where we have to introduce ourselves or talk about ourselves, we sometimes find it difficult. And it's not that you don't necessarily know yourself, but you haven't really spent time studying yourself and writing things about yourself and speaking about yourself. So this chapter and this assignment one really gives you time to sit down and really think about who you are, even though you may have an idea of who you are as a navigating the world, but really evaluate yourself. So this assignment one is going to do that through the personality quizzes and everything, and linking to these social psychology concepts, right? So yeah. All right. So you can think about this right now from the I am activity that we did. Based on those 5 things, is it closely related to your independent self or an interdependent self? And you can go back to the post and let us know. All right. All right, so our independent self and our interdependent self, right? So it's based on how we construe things. So an independent self, let's look at this chart here. An independent self means we see ourselves separate from people around us, whether it's our mother, our father, our coworkers, friends, siblings, boyfriend, girlfriend. We see ourselves separate from them, right? An interdependent self, we're connecting ourselves to our parents or our siblings or our friends or our husbands and wives or our co-workers. We find some connection to them, and we link ourselves to them. And I know you would notice if you watch reality shows or even movies, especially like African movies, you see how important family is for them, and the viewpoints of their parents or their mothers. It's a strong link and tie based on how they're going to navigate their life. And so it's interdependent. Now, I would say for me that a part of me is interdependent in some ways, because I do see myself connected strongly to my mom, right? Out of all of these, I would say to my mom, and sometimes a lot of things that I do, I may, well, not a lot of things that I do, but some paths that I take is based on decisions I make. Sometimes is based on the back of my mind or what my mom is saying. What would she think? And so I do believe that a part of my sense of self is interdependent with my mom and the relationship that we have and how important she is in my life, right? So we can have an interdependent self and an independent self. If you have a completely independent self, you have no ties to people. You completely out there alone, right? If you have an interdependent self, you could either see yourself connected to a lot of different people and groups and how they inform decisions and stuff and how you navigate, or it may just be interdependent with just some people, right? All right, so continuing on. So again, independent, you stand alone, individualistic. Interdependent, you're connected to groups or collectivists, right? So an independent identity is personal and it's defined by the individual traits and goals. So like I said, you may see, some video, if you guys go on YouTube and you watch like some of those truly videos and stuff, you see people who do some really standout things that you would say, boy, sometimes I wish I could do that, but boy, I don't have the guts. Or, those people are really, really individualistic. They have an individualistic mind and they really are independent and they don't really care about what other people says. What really matters to them is what they want for their life, their personal achievement and fulfillment. They think about their rights and their liberties, right? They do not believe that people should conform. They disapprove of that, right? Okay, their motto is to thine own self be true. Versus an interdependent person who would say no one is an island. You can't stand alone. You have to depend on people at some point, right? The independent person says the cultures that would support them would be Western culture, the part of the world that we're in, right? And a lot of people would automatically think about America, right? Versus the interdependent, the cultures that would support them would be Asian and third world countries, right? And for us, even though we're in the Western part of the world, we are kind of in the middle because we have that American influence, but then we also have African and European influences that kind of shapes our culture. And so we as a Caribbean people, we would have cultures that support an interdependent as well. More modern, as we become more modern, we may start to see people speaking out to be more independent, and have an individualistic mindset as, the ideal Western world America, who's really, like that. So social comparison. So how do you measure up? So this is another important takeaway from chapter 2, because this particular portion of chapter 2 is also going to be a part of your first assignment, right? So social comparison. So others help define the standard by which we define ourselves as being either rich or poor or smart or dumb, tall or short, right? We compare ourselves with people and we consider how we differ. Now, do you think social comparisons are good or bad? Hmm. If you said good, you're right. Social comparisons can be good, can be very good. In fact, social comparisons are good because it helps us to understand who we are as a people. You are, as a person, I should say, as an individual, you know who you are by comparing yourself to others, right? Whether you're different or and unique or you're similar or what have you. So it is good, right? If you said social comparisons can be bad, you're right too. Social comparisons can be bad because it could cause us to conform to things that, originally wouldn't really be a part of our self-concept or belief system. Or it could be bad because it could affect our self-esteem and then cause us to have a negative outlook on ourselves and then cause our self-concept to change to a negative way. So yes, it can be bad. And if you said, it could be good and bad, you're absolutely correct, right? So it can be right in the middle, it can be good, and it can be bad. But when we think about it, how do you measure up? When you compare yourself to others, how do you measure yourself? And what influence do you think social comparisons have on you? Have you ever found yourself comparing yourself to others? Raise your hand. I'm thinking you're nodding. I'm thinking you probably said yes. You, at some point in your life, you probably have found yourself comparing yourself to someone else, whether it was in a good way, a bad way, what have you, right? Whether it was to assess whether or not this person is in need. I can tell that they're in need because I have this or whatever. So you compare yourself to others in some way. We may be thinking comparing ourselves to others in a negative way, but it could be in just that process. Like I'm thinking where you see someone and you determine they're in need because you compared where they're at based on where you're at, with financial security or just food security, right? Have you compared yourself to the same person over and over and over again? For example, a sibling growing up you may have compared yourself to often, or the ex of your significant other, or a coworker, or a celebrity, or maybe someone who has the physical attribute you are trying to achieve? Hmm? Maybe, maybe not. How about with a whole group of people? Have you ever compared yourself maybe to maybe a group of people of a different race or ethnic group, or a different culture, or a different religion, or a different sorority or fraternity, or what have you, whatever type of group? Have you ever done that? Maybe it may have not been now, maybe when you were in school, maybe at some point in your life. Have you? Well, if you have, this is called social comparison. And at some point in our lives, everyone has had social comparisons. And day to day, we maybe make social comparisons without you even really being very aware of it. But it happens, right? So it involves people coming to know themselves by evaluating their own attitudes, abilities, traits in comparison with others. So you may determine that you're shy because of how you compare yourself to other people around you, and you view that they could step out more, they could, they just offer themselves to talk, or they just come right in and they talk, and then they, you know so you compare yourself. You know that perhaps that you're a very good writer because you've compared your writing with others, right? Not to say that you taking someone writing and putting it side by side, but in your interactions, you've been able to listen or read or maybe helping a friend, and you realize that, you know what, I can write very well. Or as you read a book, you can tell that, I can write just as good as this author or even better. So at some point you've done comparisons. We do comparisons on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis at some point in some way, right? So how do you measure up? Social comparisons can be positive, as we said, and negative. Have you noticed yourself feeling happy, excuse me, for a friend when you hear their good news, but a twinge of regret for yourself that you're not experiencing the same good fortune? Conversely, you found yourself feeling a tiny jolt of satisfaction when you hear someone else has fallen down a little bit. experiencing a little bit of misfortune that makes you feel luckier in comparison, we don't need to let our instincts towards social comparisons be an important part of who we are. We can minimize these tendencies and then we can counteract them with a little effort, right? And we can feel a little less stressed by them as a result. The first step, however, is that we have to be aware of social comparison. So that's why I said at first, when we mention it, you may have said, no, I've never socially compared myself to anyone. I am independent and I don't look at no one else. But the fact that you can say you're independent means you socially compared somewhere along the way to know you're independent and not interdependent or not dependent on people. Right? But it may be because you're not aware of the social comparison, right? In yourselves and others. And so you don't realize it. So now that you're becoming more aware that social comparisons exist and how they exist and the positives and the negatives, you'll be able to talk about it more. It'll be more in the forefront of your mind as you move through your day-to-day in your work environment, right? As a teacher, as a nurse, you're going to be able to utilize this and also able to understand where your clients, as students, parents, as patients and their families, where they're coming from in whatever the situation is you're dealing with at that particular time, right? The way they react or respond to certain things or the way they view themselves in a certain way, or their pain, or the need for them to be here all the time for something that you may view as a very simple issue. Why does it rate as a major issue for them, a major health need for them to always be here, right? So being aware of our social comparison, it helps us to understand where people are coming from and where we see ourselves. So here are some positives, and you can read through them. And here are some negatives of social comparison. So have a look, ponder about. So here are the different types of social comparisons. So we have upward comparison and downward comparison. Make sure you understand both. So upward comparison is when people compare themselves to people who are better than they are. So when you think about people, say you have a friend who's already an RN or in a particular position already, right? You may create an upward comparison, right? Because they are where you want to be. Now, sometimes we make downward comparisons, and this is when we would compare ourselves to those who maybe are less proficient than us. So you may have a downward comparison of someone in your class who is less proficient in the subject or in the degree program that you're in, or whatever it may be, right? But both these upward and downward comparisons have their strengths and their weaknesses, because when we have an upward comparison, this could help us to improve ourselves, right? Because we're looking at this goal of, where we see ourselves. For example, like these moguls, we go to, as a people, as humans, we go to these conferences with all these big moguls who have been so successful at entrepreneurship and all these things, because we create these upward comparisons because we want to improve ourselves to gain that same goal, right? So it's a motivation when we have this upward comparison to self-improve. And then the downward comparison, it helps to build your self-esteem when you have a downward comparison, maybe to someone who is less proficient, it builds your self-esteem. So as an athlete, right, and they have a downward comparison to other athletes who aren't as fast as them, it helps to improve their self-esteem. And if you have a higher self-esteem, that athlete is going to be willing to make more sacrifices for increasing their training and staying on track and keeping to that diet that they probably didn't really want to be, because they're doing, because they're human, they want to eat junk food sometimes, right? But that downward comparison, but I am the fastest, I faster than everyone else. So it boosts your self-esteem to say, hey, I can't lose track and sight of my goals. I have to stick to this plan so I could avoid failing. So both, although they seem bad in areas, they have some strengths in them while they may have some weaknesses as well. So upward comparisons, they find similarity with targets and improve oneself in order to improve their views of self, right? So, but downward comparisons are often centered on making ourselves feel better about our current abilities and our current traits, right? For example, you may not like your nose, but you may think your nose is big, but then you see someone who knows bigger, and you make a downward comparison, and it make you feel better about your nose because you say, well, at least my nose isn't as big as their one, right? So or we may not be great at something, but great at cooking, but you say, at least my guava better than theirs, so it helps us to make ourselves feel better. So these are just some types of social comparisons that you can look at. And now we come to the final activity for today. So you have a discussion post that you're going to complete today. Your initial post is due by 1 o'clock, which is the end of our class session. All right. You need to reply to your classmates, to at least 2 classmates. And you have up till 10 o'clock tonight to create these replies. Now remember, even though you're applying to at least 2 classmates, if they ask you a question, sorry, one second. If they ask you a question, you need to come back and answer, right? Respond to them, okay? Because this needs to be an ongoing conversation. It shows that you are engaging, and a good chunk of your grade in discussion post is the engagement. It isn't just how well you do the initial post, even though that is very important, but the engagement is equally important. So I want to see you engaging with each other with these replies, right? And so your initial post, you should have it up at least by 1 o'clock. You have from 9 to 1 to do this. And your replies, you have until 10 p.m. to continue replying to people. The instructions, all that you need to know for the discussion post, you'll find on the Google Classroom page. You're going to go over to the discussion post assignments, and you're going to read all the instructions, read what it is that you have to write. Remember, as you will see in the instructions, when you do discussion posts and discussion post replies, you should show your command of APA 7 and making in-text citation references, and also showing us your references at the end of the post, okay, for both the initial and the replies, all right, because you're graded for it. So see you guys. I hope you enjoyed this session, this asynchronous session. And as always, if you have questions throughout the asynchronous time working on these individual and group activities, you can send me a quick message on the email or on the Google Classroom page. See you guys. Bye.